Nobody at the Rocky Ford co-op shed could quite explain what the Vogel boy was doing out in his melon rows. Curtis was 12 years old. He had paid $12 at a farm sale for the rusted corrugated tin stripped off the collapsed Kessler shed, and now, every evening after chores, he snipped it into short panels and pitched them as steep little tents over his cantaloupes, wiring every corner down to a driven stake row after row until the whole patch glinted like a tin roof somebody had laid flat on the ground. He wasn't building forts. He wasn't hiding anything under them. He wasn't playing at any of the things a boy his age was supposed to play at. He had a single quiet purpose out there in the Otero County dust, and he would not tell a soul what it was. So the men leaning on the shed settled it among themselves. Shiny tin turned up to the sun. He was scaring off the crows. They were wrong. If a story about a boy the whole valley laughed at is the kind of thing you came here for, take a second to subscribe and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We truly love reading it. Now, back to the rows. The Vogels farmed third-generation ground in the Arkansas Valley, the flat sugar beet and cantaloupe country south of the river where Rocky Ford melons had been shipped out by the crate for as long as anyone kept records. It was good dirt under hard weather, and the family had long since made its peace with both. Curtis's grandfather, Emil, had worked the Rocky Ford melon sheds since the 40s, grading and crating fruit before the boy's father was even born, and he carried the whole history of the valley in his hands and his silences. Nailed to the inside wall of the Vogel barn, where a lesser man might have hung a diploma, was a single dented sheet of tin. It was pocked all over with shallow craters, each one about the size of a thumb, and Emil had put it there himself. It had come off a shed roof after the hailstorm of June 1954, the year the sky opened over the valley and took the crop in one afternoon. When Emil talked about that year, and he did not talk about it often, he would reach up and tap the dented sheet with 2 fingers, as if it were still listening. Curtis had grown up under that tapping. He had grown up knowing that his grandfather measured time by the storms and not the seasons, and that the worst of those storms had left a sound the old man never quite got out of his ears. This was hail country, and everyone who farmed it knew what that meant. The high plains east of the Rockies catch more hail than almost anywhere on the continent, and every grower in the valley farmed 20 minutes from ruin from the middle of June clear through August. Everybody could name a year. Everybody had stood in a field the morning after and looked at what was left of it. The grown men had folded the risk into the plain arithmetic of the trade, and they said so at the shed with a shrug, like men saying a thing they have stopped fighting. You plant knowing that some years the sky simply takes it. You carried insurance if you could afford it, and prayers if you could not, and you did not waste good daylight trying to armor a whole field against something that came without warning and left again in a quarter of an hour. That was just melon farming on the Arkansas. The hail was the tax, and you paid it in the years it came due. Curtis had heard that shrug his whole life. He had decided, without announcing it to anyone, that he did not believe in it. What the boy had gotten from his grandfather was not a shrug. It was a rule, and the rule was simple enough to carry in one hand. Hail only kills what it hits square, Emil had told him one evening in the barn, tapping the old sheet. A stone that glances off does nothing. A stone that lands flat drives straight through a leaf and bruises the fruit beneath it. And a melon, his grandfather said, is the one crop on the place you can never buy back. Beans you put right back in the ground in a week, he told the boy. A melon crop is 60 days of vine and fruit set, and once the sky beats it flat there is no replanting it. It is gone for the whole season. So you did not try to cover everything, Emil said. You covered the one thing that could not come back, and you did not lay a flat roof against the sky, because a flat roof only invites the stone to punch on through it. You don't fight hail, the old man said. You give it a steep roof to glance off of. Pitch the tin steep so the stone slid and skipped instead of striking home. Wire down every corner, because the wind always runs out ahead of a hailstorm and gets there first, and leave the south ends of the little tents standing open so the sun could still reach in to ripen the fruit, and the bees could still work the blossoms. It was not a roof at all. It was a helmet, built over the 60 days that mattered most. Curtis did not get it right the first time. That first week he laid his panels too low, almost flat over the rows, because flat was easier to reach across and he was in a hurry to cover ground. He skipped half the wires too, telling himself the tin was heavy enough to hold itself down. The men at the shed had their joke by then. Word had gone around that the Vogel boy was roofing his melons to spook the birds, and somebody sharpened it into a line that stuck. The Vogel boy will shade his own crop to death chasing crows. His father heard it in town and said nothing, because he did not understand it any better than they did. Then a dry wind came up ahead of a storm that never dropped its rain, just wind, running hard across the flat and hunting for anything loose. It found the boys' low panels. One of them lifted at a corner he had never wired, stood up on its edge, and cartwheeled down the row, and its edge came across a whole run of young vines and cut them off clean at the ground. The armor had wounded the very thing it was built to guard. Curtis stood over the sliced vines in the gray morning and felt the whole joke settle onto his shoulders at once. Emil came out and looked a long time and did not scold him. "Steeper than you think," Emil said finally. "Wire every corner. Weight the feet." That was all of it. Over 3 long evenings the boy pulled every tent back up and pitched it again, steep this time, every corner wired to a driven stake, the feet weighted with stones hauled up from the ditch. His hands blistered and healed and blistered again. He did not complain about it, and he did not quit, and he still did not tell anyone why it mattered so much to get it right. The first proof came quietly, as the best proofs tend to, and it came to his father before it came to the county. A small shower of pea-sized hail rattled through the valley one night in the middle of July. Nothing that made the news, gone again in a few minutes. At first light, Curtis's father walked out along the rows the boy had worked so hard over, still half expecting to find them foolish. What he found instead were fresh dents peppered bright across the rusted tin, dozens of them, each little crater catching the early sun. And underneath, when he crouched and lifted the open south end of a tent, the vines were green and whole, and the young melons had not a mark on them. He stayed crouched there a good while. When he came in for breakfast, he looked at his son across the table and said, "I should have asked sooner what you were doing out there." Curtis only nodded. It was enough. The real test stacked up off the mountains on a still, heavy afternoon at the end of July. Anyone raised in the valley could read it coming, the anvil cloud climbing white and enormous over the peaks, the light going strange and green, the birds gone silent. Then it came down on the valley all at once. Golf ball hail and bigger for 20 solid minutes, stones falling hard enough to split a fence rail. And the valley heard the Vogel patch before a single soul laid eyes on it. All down the section road the hail was doing its damage in the ordinary way, a dull roar of ice on open ground, on roofs, on the co-op shed that boomed like a struck drum. But out over the boys' melon rows the sound was different, higher and ringing, and almost countable. Hail striking 100 little steep tin roofs and glancing away, 100 snare drums going at once under the black sky. Everywhere else the storm was taking the ear. The neighbors' tomato fields were flayed down to bare stems. The corn stood shredded into hanging green ribbons. The open melon fields were beaten flat into the mud, vine by vine, whole rows of fruit split and drowning. Windshields starred along the road where trucks had pulled over blind. And when it finally dragged off east and the ringing stopped, Curtis walked out into the wet and lifted the first dented tent, and his rows came out from under it green, the cantaloupes netted and heavy and whole. The only unbroken fruit left standing in the whole valley. Word travels fast after a hailstorm, because the buyers still have their orders to fill, and suddenly almost no one has fruit to sell. By the second morning they were driving the section road looking for anything left alive, and they found one patch in the entire valley with melons on it. The men who had made the joke came out too, and they stood at the ends of the boys' rows, turning the dented panels over in their hands, feeling the craters the stones had left, saying very little. The laughter was gone. One of them, an old neighbor who had laughed the loudest, turned a panel over and said, quietly, "The boy had it right," and the rest of us paid the tax. The extension agent drove out from the county office, knelt down in the mud, lifted one of the little steep tents, and turned an unblemished cantaloupe over in his hand. He knew exactly what he was looking at. "This is the same thing the orchard men pay thousands of dollars for," he said. Hail netting, built out of $12 of junk tin. He asked the boy how a child his age had known to do such a thing. "My grandfather kept a piece of the 1954 storm nailed up in the barn," Curtis said. "I just listened to it." The agent asked him to come show the growers how he had pitched and wired the panels. The crop sold at triple the going price, the only cantaloupes for sale in the Arkansas Valley that week. Emil never once said that he had told him so. He walked the rows a single time with his grandson, tapped a dented panel with 2 fingers as if greeting an old acquaintance, and left it at that. But the boy understood the shape of the thing now, the same shape the old sheet in the barn had been trying to teach him all along. The sky takes what stands out bare in front of it. It keeps its hands off the things somebody loved enough to cover. Louis Bromfield, who farmed his own worn-out Ohio Valley back to life, wrote that the land comes to us out of eternity, and that when the youngest of us who ever worked it is gone, it will still be here. The tin was only ever tin. The care was the real crop. So tell us, what is the one farming lesson that has stayed with you all these years? The thing somebody older taught you that you have never once let go of? Leave it below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from. We read every single one.